Hi, this is Pete Thompson. Today we're going to talk a little bit about personal protective equipment. Protecting employees from workplace hazards. Employers must protect employees from workplace hazards such as machines, hazardous substances, and dangerous work procedures that can cause injury. In order to do that, we must use engineering and work practices, and then if those don't work, we're supposed to use personal protective equipment. As you can see, PPE, or personal protective equipment, is the last level of control. This is a hierarchy of controls. The first thing you do in order to get rid of a hazard in any process is to put in engineering controls, and we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. Second, work practice controls. And then finally, to the extent you have to, you put in personal protective equipment. Engineering controls. Basically, an engineering control is a physical thing that you can do to change the employee exposure to the potential hazard. And that might be something like a guard on a piece of equipment, or a cover to protect the employee from having access to it. You can also make changes to the process. You can enclose a process, or you can use ventilation to keep the dust, for example, away from the employee. Work practice controls is, like it says, a practice, a way that you change the way people do things in order to eliminate the hazard. Some examples of that might be using wet methods to suppress dust where you can, personal hygiene, housekeeping and maintenance, or changing jobs of workers so they have less exposure. Some examples of PPE. We'll talk about each of these. There's eye PPE, face, head, feet, hands and arms, body, and hearing protection. We have an established PPE program that sets out the procedures as to how we select a PPE, how we provide it. The first step of that is an assessment that we've done to figure out what the hazards are present, how we can eliminate them, and if not, what PPE is needed. Once we have the PPE selected, then we have to provide training to show you how to use the PPE properly. The training has to include these things: when the PPE is necessary, what type is needed, how to put it on, take it off, adjust it, the limitations of the PPE, and proper care, maintenance, and useful life of the PPE. First, we'll talk about eye protection. Some of the things that can cause danger to your eye is dust and other flying particles, such as metal shavings, molten metal that hopefully we never see, chemicals such as acids and caustics, blood or other potentially infectious materials, and intense light, such as that you would see from welding. Some of the PPE for eye protection include safety glasses, or they call them spectacles, and you're familiar with those. Nothing much particular of those. Just make sure if you have PPE or safety glasses, make sure they're in decent shape. You should be able to see through them. They shouldn't be scratched up or damaged. If they are, then they should be replaced. Welding shields is used for welding. Obviously, for a welder would wear something like that to protect himself from the light, and as well as the material that might come off. A face shield is often used as a second layer of protection in addition to safety glasses. Head protection. Some of the causes of head injuries, including falling objects, bumping your head against things, or contact with electrical. There's three basic kinds of hard hats. The main kind is what's called their Class G, or formerly used to be called Class A. And that's just a general hard hat that most people use. There's also a couple other kinds. A Class E, which is for electrical work, which protects you from the falling objects, but also protects you from electrical hazards. And then there's Class C, which is like a bump cap, and those have limited protection against falling objects, so those are not really permitted or recommended here. Next is hearing protection that we've talked about in another training, but basically you have your earmuffs and your earplugs. foot protection. Some of the causes of foot injuries: heavy objects such as barrels, tools, equipment can fall onto your feet. Sharp objects that might pierce the bottom of a regular shoe. Molten metal that might splash on feet. Hot, wet surfaces, and slippery surfaces. Safety shoes are specifically designed, and they should have an ANSI or ASME rating on them. They have impact-resistant toes and heat-resistant soles that protect your foot from the various hazards. Some of them are electrically conductive, but I don't believe that that's a requirement here. Your shoes should be in decent shape so that if they do get worn out or they're damaged or ripped, then they need to be replaced. They shouldn't be used anymore. Sometimes you might see these shoes that look like this that have what's called metatarsal guards, and they just give you a higher level of protection up onto the top of your foot. Hand protection. Some of the hand hazards: burns, bruises, abrasions and cuts, punctures, fractures, amputations, and chemical exposures. Some of the types of gloves, these are more chemical related gloves, rubber gloves, butyl gloves, Norfoil gloves, Viton, nitrile. If there is a requirement to have any kind of chemical exposure, then we would specify specifically what kind of glove you need to wear. There are also cut-resistant gloves such as Kevlar gloves and stainless steel mesh gloves. Body protection. Some of the causes of body injuries would include intense heat, splashes from hot materials, impacts from tools, machinery, and materials, cuts, hazardous chemicals, contact with bloodborne pathogens, potentially infectious materials, and radiation. Some other examples, here's some examples. A cooling vest is a good thing that can be used in a hot area. And here's another example of sleeves and apron. And then here's an example of coveralls, just what we call a Tyvek suit, or what I call a hazmat suit, the green one. So in summary, a couple things we'll go through. We have a PPE program in place. We've done the assessment for the workplace for hazards, and the first thing we do, as we talked about, we're going to use engineering and work practice controls to eliminate any kind of hazard before we use the PPE. Once we do put the PPE into requirement, then that would be the information as far as the PPE that you need to wear will be provided, and that's typically posted in the lunchroom on the bulletin board. There should be a list of the required PPE for each job function or each area where you work. If you have a question about what PPE you need to wear or can't find those assessments, then you should contact your supervisor or the plant manager. The company is required to select and provide appropriate PPE at no cost, for the most part, to employees to protect you from hazards. So things like safety glasses and respirators are required to be paid for by the employer, by the company. Informing employees why PPE is necessary, we've talked about that, and when it must be worn. And again, the assessment that's posted would be the requirement as far as where it should be worn. And that should also actually be posted at the work area also. Training on how to use the PPE, which we've done in the past and we'll continue to do. And if there's any kind of question as to whether the PPE is damaged or needs to be repaired, you should ask your supervisor or the plant manager. And then finally, the requirement to wear the employees need to wear the selected PPE. The PPE is there not for fun, not to make your life worse, but it's to protect you. So you need to wear wherever it's required. You need to make sure you wear that. And of course, that will be enforced, continue to be enforced. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, let me know or your plant manager know.